Well, good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Woo! We're very excited to be here. I left Toronto. I had a large coffee, Jez had a small coffee, so it's going to take him a minute to wake up. So we're really excited to be here today and talk about the secrets of high performance, or we were, and then we started chatting and realized that what we really wanted to talk about is that tools won't fix your broken DevOps. Are we okay with like a pivot, because DevOps? We're still down with this?
We're agile, right?
Because if you're not okay with it, that's okay, because we're going to talk about this anyway. It's fine.
Yes is the right answer.
Yes is the correct answer. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. First, what is DevOps, in case you don't know, or at least kind of the version of what we're going to talk about today. Why should we care? How does it work? How do we improve performance quality? And then what's this like culture thing, and how can we use it to make everything better, since tools aren't going to be fixing your broken DevOps? So I'll let Jez kick us off.
So who here works in a company that's agile? You're doing the whole agile thing. Okay, who has in their life, that's everyone, right? Who wouldn't do agile? Who in their life has worked in a company that was not agile? That's also a lot of people, gosh. So you've all been through the agile transformation, right? Where everyone goes on the 2-day Scrum training, and now everyone's taking orders from management standing up instead of sitting down. And now that huge backlog of work we can't ever complete is now prioritized and estimated. And we're agile, woo. So, I mean, still, in my experience, and I've been saying this for years now, and it's still true, the most common form of agile method is what Dave West, who now I think is at TaskTop, calls water, scrum, fall, where we're doing this nice development in iterations, like weekly or 2 weekly or whatever. But anytime you want to build something new, you still have to go through this crappy kind of budgeting and approval and decomposition and estimation planning process that takes months and months. And once, you don't release at the end of every iteration. You have to wait until the release is done, and then you integrate, and then you test, and then maybe you fix some of the bugs that you tested, that you found during testing, if you're feeling particularly optimistic. So this is really painful and miserable. Does anyone have a friend who has this problem? Yeah, it's pretty common, right, still today, which is sad. Can we do better as an industry? Yes, we can do better. I still love showing this slide from Amazon. This is from 2011. They're more than one order of magnitude faster than this now. Releasing changes to production every 11.6 seconds, up to 1,079 deployments per hour. On average, 10,000 boxes receiving the deployment, up to 30,000 boxes receiving those deployments. This despite the fact that Amazon is highly regulated. They are a publicly traded company, subject to Sarbanes-Oxley. They process the occasional credit card transaction. And the other thing I like to point out is that this was really hard. It took them 4 years to completely re-architect to achieve this. So this was not an easy problem. They did this re-architecture between 2001 and 2004 and became one of the first companies to solve this problem, which the DevOps movement grew out of. And we're here defining DevOps. Everyone's got their own definition of DevOps. That's by design. It's because we're still working out how to solve these problems. But I think what we can talk about is what are the problems we're trying to solve? How do we build and operate secure, resilient systems, distributed systems at scale?
And can I point something out real quick? Who here has heard more than one definition of DevOps? And who here has heard that that's the problem with DevOps, is that there are too many definitions and so we can't make it work? Okay, there is one definition of Agile, right? There's the Agile Manifesto. Who here has heard 27 different definitions of Agile? One definition isn't going to solve it.
Yeah, that's
right?
not the problem.
That's not the problem. We're all going to make up our own.
The problem is this is hard, and
Right.
we still haven't worked out how to do it. And 3 years, 3 years ago, no one knew what Kubernetes is, and now it's everywhere. And that's like a complete paradigm shift that's happened during the time the DevOps movement has been alive. So you've got to keep awake. So we've been researching for the last 4 or 5 years now.
4 or 5? Yeah, we're on year 5 now.
Yeah. How companies create high performance. And some of what we'll be doing in the next 25 minutes is talking about that.
Yeah. So for the last 4 years, we were working with the team at Puppet. Now we're working with the team at Google to really understand if DevOps matters. Because we want to think that what we do matters, but maybe it doesn't, right? Because for 40 years, all of the literature, all of the research said that technology didn't matter. Well, here's the thing. If we do DevOps right, if we pair technology with process and culture, then it matters. And here's what we find. Firms with high-performing IT organizations are twice as likely to exceed their commercial goals. And what we mean by that is they're twice as likely to exceed profitability, productivity, and market share goals. So doing the DevOps makes a big difference. Not only that, but we find that high-performing organizations exceed market cap by 50% over the previous 3 years. So it does show up, and it does make a difference. Now, not only money matters, which sometimes I'm like, what? Money? There's more than money. But more than money does matter. So there are not-for-profit organizations out there that care about more than money, but also profit-driven organizations have concerns that are beyond profit, right? So what we found is that high performers were also twice as likely to exceed their objectives in things like effectiveness and efficiency and customer satisfaction. So being able to deliver your technology helps drive your broader objectives because it lets you delight your customers, it lets you pivot when you need to pivot, it lets you and helps you keep up with compliance and regulatory demands and security vulnerabilities. So this is really important for us. I keep talking about technology and software delivery performance and IT performance. So what do I mean by this? Because sometimes definitions do matter, especially when you want to measure it and test it and research it. So this is what we mean. We mean speed and stability. We are talking about DevOps, right? We're not just talking about Agile when we only talk about the development organizations, then we throw it over the wall and let the IT operations group suffer. So speed and stability. We're talking about lead time for changes.
And that, by the way, is version control to production.
Code commit to code deploy. Now, I'll mention that we focus on that part of the pipeline because that's the part that is the most predictable. We want to make this as efficient as possible. We're excluding that front end because that is the more creative part. That's the development part of the process where you're going to see more variability. So that's okay.
And variability is good in product development. We
Right,
actually want
exactly. We're also talking about release frequency, how often you're deploying code. Okay, now when I talk about stability, I'm talking about time to restore service. We're working in highly complex systems. We're going to see failure. So instead of talking about mean time between failures, we're going to talk about mean time to restore service. How quickly can that come back up? Because if you only fail once a year, but that failure has a massive, massive blast radius, and you're down for a week or two, that's bad news. But if you fail very, very small, and your customers almost don't notice, let's say you're Netflix and you go down, and the only thing that happens is, I can't rate my favorite show. I don't rate shows anyway. I don't notice. And then also change fail rate. What percentage of your changes that you push to production result in any type of degradation that requires some type of response? So it doesn't actually need to be a full failure with a large blast radius. It can be anything that requires any type of response. So this is a lot of my chart, let's be real. You can see this in our book, Accelerate, or you can see it in the 2017 State of DevOps report. For those of you that can't see it in the back or in the front, because it's pretty bad. I'm going to read it to you. So the first two are those speed metrics, and the bottom two are the stability metrics. Here's what's important to see. The high performers are optimizing on everything, okay? High performers can deploy on demand. Their lead time for changes are less than an hour. their MTTR is less than an hour, their change fail rate is 0 to 15%. And we actually see that show up in the 2, 3, 4% range. The important thing to note here, they're optimizing and they're maximizing on all of it, and they all move together. If anyone is telling you and whispering in dark alleys that you have to make trade-offs, it's not true, and that hasn't shown up in 4 years of analysis that I've done. You don't have to slow down in order to be stable. It's not showing up anywhere in the data ever. Now, the low performers are deploying between once a week and once a month. Their lead time for changes is between once a week and once a month. MTTR is between a day and a week, and change fail rate is between 31 and 45%. So maybe think about where your team is. By the way, this analysis is done on the team level, because if any of us are in larger organizations, we probably know and notice that teams perform very differently, right? We might have some teams that are killing it and some teams that are really on that struggle bus, right? We see teams that are doing very, very different things. Okay, but how do we get here? How do we make things better? We don't just walk into high performance. I would love to, right? I just want to get better.
We do have some sparkly DevOps wands that we can wave, and those make the DevOps unicorns come and fix all your problems. It's a free service. It's a free service.
I mean, I would love that. I would just set that as like an autoresponder in my email. Dear Nicole, how do I get from low to medium to high performance? I would pay for that. This is how. So a bunch of our research points to several things, right? So it needs to be some tech and some process and some people.
And the other thing before we talk about the capabilities is to emphasize that this is true for companies of all sizes and all domains. We see high performers among highly regulated, large financial service organizations. We see low performers in startups. So this is true across different regions. Anyone can be a high performer. It takes an enormous amount of work and dedication and focus to do that, but it's possible for everyone.
So can I add a, aka no excuses?
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes we'll have companies come to us and say, I really want you to do this data DevOps report. I would like to commission a research study, but for my special industry or for my special highly regulated field because I don't see myself on your chart. And I'm like, no, you're here. This low performer category reports the median. We can have a lovely stats discussion about why it's the median and not the average. Let's chat. Call me. And they're like, but I'm not here. And I'm like, no, you're here. You're just on the low end of the low performers. It's fine. You just need to keep working.
The great news is there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity. And by the way, when there's so much low-hanging fruit, when you do that, you can start improving really, really quickly, that's the silver linings day, right?
There's always good news.
There's always
We
good
bring
news.
good news.
Yeah, there's always good news. You're definitely here though, no excuses. There's plenty of opportunity for you.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 2016 working for the US federal government, which is the most highly regulated organization I've ever worked for. And we were able to do continuous delivery. We built this service called cloud.gov, which is a platform as a service where we were taking changes to the underlying platform from version control to production using deployment pipelines. And the reason that I did that and that I helped work on that project was so that I could stand here, basically when people are like, that won't work here, I can say, we did it in the US federal government, what's your excuse? Which in Texas works really well. They don't like that.
Well, and right now we are working with, and we have worked with telecom, banks, pharma, national defense contractors.
Yep.
Who am I missing?
Yeah, I mean, that's good enough.
Lots.
Anyone can do this. It's still really hard, but anyone can do this. So,
and we see startups down here too. We see startups in the struggle bus. Anyone can be amazing and anyone can screw this up. Lots of opportunity.
We're equal opportunity. Yeah. So looking at the capabilities which drive performance, and this is kind of, we don't have time to talk about this, but we took this, it's your model is that it's capabilities that drive performance.
Your model. the industry helps inform what we should be doing, and then we test it, and then the data tells us what works, and the data also tells us like when our hypotheses are not working.
But I mean, the title of this talk is, it's not tools,
Yeah.
it's capabilities. And
Yeah.
so what improves performance is capabilities, your ability to do certain things well. And so there's three categories that we're going to talk about. The first is the technical ones. And so all these things that we've been talking about for many years in the DevOps movement, and before that in continuous delivery, and even in Agile, a lot of this stuff just comes from XP, which is quite old now. Not as old as me, but still quite old. Things like using version control or continuous integration, test automation, building security and quality in at the source rather than having it be a downstream activity, making sure that teams actually have the ability to choose their own tools. All these things have a measurable impact on performance, and it turns out on a bunch of other things as well. Implementing these practices improves your culture, and we'll talk about culture at the end of this talk, but the fact we're able to show and see in the data that implementing the practices changes culture is huge. It improves quality, measured in terms of the level of rework that people are doing. It also decreases deployment pain and decreases team burnout. So we've shown not only that it improves outcomes in terms of performance, it also makes teams happier and improves job satisfaction and reduces burnout. So it has a lot of positive impacts.
And we see examples of this lots of different places. So I know the Microsoft Bing team did this, right? So they wanted to make a lot of investments to make their technical tool chain better. And what they actually found is that their work-life scores drastically improved. In just 1 year, their work-life scores on that team went from 38% to 75%. Because when your technical work gets better, you can leave all of your technical work at work. And then when you go home, you go home. It makes your work better.
When me and Dave Farley wrote the continuous delivery book, our whole goal was make releases boring. We were sick of having to work evenings and weekends to push out releases. And who in this room, by the way, has to work evenings and weekends, or people on their team work evenings and weekends to push out releases? Okay, that's quite a lot of you. I take that.
So you failed.
Yeah, I take that as a sign of personal failure. Because the continuous delivery book came out in 2010. And most of the stuff in that book was stuff we were doing in 2005, 2006 in ThoughtWorks. And it wasn't clever stuff. We didn't have Puppet or Chef or any of these tools. The very first project that I worked on where we applied these techniques, there was an 8,000-line Ant script to deploy. And we took that to the ops people and said, what do you think of this? And broadly speaking, they told us to shove it. And we said, well, what technology do you like? And they said, well, we use Bash. So we wrote them a deployment system in Bash called Conan the Deployer. And you would fire up Conan and tell it the tag in CVS to build from and the environment to deploy to. And everything was done in Bash. I mean, we didn't have amazing tools or all the things that we have today.
Bash is amazing.
I mean, yeah, Bash is amazing. Good point. Well made. But the point is, it wasn't amazing tools that solved the problem. It was us finding hacky ways to make things easier and work with people in dev and ops to actually improve the process and do process improvement work. That was what solved the problem for us. So we talked about the technical capabilities. We also have some management capabilities. First of all, lean management. So things like limiting work in process. Instead of trying to do lots of things all at once and maximizing your capacity, making sure that everyone's busy, let's focus on doing the important things and nothing else and getting those things done as fast as possible. Turns out, and this is one of the interesting results from the research, that only works if you're also doing these other things. Just creating WIP limits doesn't on its own impact performance. You also have to...
Can I stats you real quick?
Yeah, stats me.
It's more effective. It's much more effective if you combine it with
visual displays for showing you your build status, showing you what's actually going on in your system, how many tests you've got passing, all those visual displays that you should be having in your organization, and the use of feedback from your tool chain to make business decisions. These three things combined impact performance and also impact culture and lead to low levels of burnout.
And we think this might be the case in technology in particular. So this is where research, Nicole gets all excited. We know that these things are important in general, right? It ended up playing out a little bit differently in technology, and it may be because we're working in software, right? We work in this situation where our inventory is invisible. We work on a product that is invisible until it's done, right? Software, like, you can't see. So it helps us when we combine it with visual displays to help us see what's happening, which was kind of interesting and kind of cool for us to test and realize that these things don't work quite as well unless we have ways to help us see what it is that we're working on and how our contributions play into the greater whole.
And then the final thing, and this is the whole model, so this is
Lovingly called the BFD.
Yeah. Which, if you get the book, obviously the model's in there, and there should be a link to this, but we haven't got it. But hit us up afterwards on Twitter. We'll post the link. These are all the capabilities. We talked about the technical capabilities. Talked about lean management. Also, lean product development approaches, things that have been popularized by the lean startup movement. So working in small batches, using prototypes or MVPs, making the flow of work through the value stream visible, using techniques like story walls or value stream mapping, actually gathering and then implementing customer feedback, turns out is really good. And then team experimentation, that means technical teams aren't just taking orders. Technical teams have the ability to change requirements and come up with hypotheses in order to actually build things that delight customers and provide value to the organization. So if you're working in an agile organization and you're just taking orders in terms of what to build and you don't get any input, it's not agile. Unfortunately, that's still very prevalent today. So all of these capabilities impact software delivery performance, which impacts organizational performance. They also have impacts on a bunch of other things, and in particular culture, and we'll spend just a few minutes talking about culture before we wrap up.
So I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with it, but Google did this study that I love on like 36,000 engineers because they wanted to see what made the perfect team. And what they thought would make the perfect team was just the right skills, which sort of sounds like, or reminds me of the tool argument in DevOps, right? Like, what's going to be the perfect tool? Well, at Google, they thought it would be what would be the perfect set of skills to make the perfect team. Was it going to be like a Node.js programmer, and then an R programmer, and then a project manager? Turns out there were no statistically significant findings anywhere, like nothing, across 36,000 engineers. What did matter to make a high-performing team? This. Number one, far and away, psychological safety. And then number two, dependability, structure and clarity in the work, meaning and impact. And I love this finding because what it really comes down to is team dynamics. Can you trust your team? We ended up looking into some of this, and it turns out this shows up in some of our research a couple of different places. It kind of splits between Western organizational culture, which I'll talk about next, and then identity. So what we did is we looked at a high-trust culture or a mission-driven culture. And it also comes down to how organizations process information. So this comes from a typology developed by and defined by Dr. Ron Westrom. He was a sociologist that studied safety cultures and performance outcomes of safety cultures, particularly in high-risk contexts like healthcare, aviation, and nuclear power. And what he found is that generative cultures were particularly good at processing information, sharing information, and they were predictive of outcomes. And low-trust organizations, pathological organizations, weren't very good at this. And so if we kind of talk through these, let's take a look at who may fall into some of these categories. Pathological organization is typified by low cooperation. The messenger is shot. If anyone's heard that before, right? So people who bring us bad news, we blame them for it. Responsibilities are shirked. Bridging is discouraged. Failure leads to scapegoating, and novelty is crushed.
Crushed.
Who here has a friend that might work in a company like this? Across our data sets, I think 25, 30% of people work in teams like this.
Crushed.
A bureaucratic organization. This is about 55% of our data set. Modest cooperation. Messengers are neglected. Narrowly defined responsibilities. Bridging's tolerated. Failure leads to justice, and novelty leads to problems. Who here has a friend that might work here? Okay, couple hands. Now a generative culture. This is very performance-oriented or maybe mission-oriented. High cooperation, messengers are trained, risks are shared, bridging is encouraged. So this sounds kind of like bridging across silos, right? Breaking down silos. Failure leads to inquiry. This makes me think of like postmortems. And then novelty is implemented. This was about 25%, 30% of our population. Who here has a friend or is lucky enough to work in this organization? Who here has no friends? So as we started looking into this, we selected this because as I mentioned as I was going through, it sounded a lot like DevOps culture, right? And as you saw in some of that BFD, this ended up being very predictive of both software delivery performance and organizational performance. So it was interesting to see that this also held true in a technology context. Not interesting, although I guess maybe affirming, right? So often we hear that culture is very important. Now, this is great though, because we found that this is true. Some people say culture is so important, but it's just so hard, right? I can't measure it, it's just a thing. Well, I just said that it's true. If it's true, that means I must have found a way to measure it. We can indeed measure it. You can measure it using Likert scales. So we use this in psychometrics. Often in technology, we just rely on things that we can pull from systems. You can't ask a system what people feel like when they do their work. But we know that's really, really important. So we can do this by asking people a handful of questions. This has been shared online a couple places. You can Google it and find it. It's also shared in the book. But you can ask them these 6 or 7 questions, rated on a scale from 1, anchored on 1, strongly disagree, to anchoring on 7, strongly agree. You can combine those together, average them together, because it forms what we call a latent construct. Because we can measure different pieces of it, right? Because I can't say, how's your culture? But if we know that a culture is combined of several different things, and then we combine them together, it's statistically valid and reliable. My nerd moment was Dr. Westrom emailed me a couple years ago and said that he heard that we were using it in our research, and would I share it with him? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, and I emailed it to him, and about 10 minutes later, I like panicked in my stomach, and I was like, I already hit send, and what if I'm doing it wrong? And he said that we were doing quite well. So, and it's been published in peer review, and it passes several statistical tests. So there are several companies and organizations throughout the industry that are using this as a quick quarterly check, because it's just 6 questions, right? So you can kind of check almost like the temperature of your team and see how they're doing. Now, how do we influence culture though, right? What if our culture's like sucky and we want to make it better? There are a few different ways to do this, but what we've found is that you change the culture by changing the work, right? We can change things by changing what it is that we do. And John Shook found this.
Yeah, this is from my favorite case study about organizational transformation, which is also the lean movement. So we don't have time to talk about it now. We're out of time, but I really recommend going to this podcast and listening to the story of NUMMI and how they changed culture. This is where the word lean in the context of lean manufacturing actually comes from, is this story. So highly recommend this. The TLDR is the way you change culture is by changing how people behave and what they do, and that's why implementing capabilities is so powerful as a way of improving culture. So we're out of time now. I think just to conclude, if you take one thing away from today, it should be that high performers do better at throughput and stability. It's not a zero-sum game. Going faster makes you safer. And so these stability and throughput are a virtuous circle. They enable each other. Technology and agility do matter, but culture is really important as well. Culture is not intangible. You can measure it, you can change it, and it is hugely important. We have a survey open for State of DevOps Report 2018. Please go and take it if you have 20 minutes free. This is what powers our research. We tell you all this stuff because people like you took the survey and gave us data. please, if you have 20 minutes, take the survey and give us more data so we can come back.
If you care about any of these topics, we're diving into additional things this year. Things like cloud, database security. We're digging into these because we heard back from all of you, people like you, who were really interested in hearing about how things like this would drive, or do they matter, or what types of things are important in DevOps outcomes and driving value. So these are some of the topics we're diving into this year. So if these things are important to you, or trying to convince anyone on your leadership team that doing the DevOps is important, if it is.
We also have a book signing at lunchtime today, so come along, grab a book.
Thanks to CGI for sponsoring.
Thank you, CGI. And if you send an email to nicolef@sendyourslides.com with the subject DevOps, you'll get these slides and a bunch of free stuff. Thanks very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks.